Now then, it's Burnsy. Welcome to our regular Curiosity podcast, the CuriosityCast. Every episode we take questions asked by the members of the public in Hull, and you could be amongst them, and try and get them the best answers from the very best brains in the city of Hull. Not all questions are about Hull. They can be about whatever you want to discover. On this episode is someone who helped shape not only Hull, but helped shape the whole of the UK and probably had an influence round the world. He's a former government minister, he's a former local MP, and not content with that lot, he then went on to become a very popular author. I've just in the last month or so read one of his latest novels. He started with a series of memoirs, followed by a series of novels, and now a biography of former Prime Minister Harold Wilson. He even finds time to occupy a role as Chancellor of the University of Hull. Clearly no slouch in whatever he turns his hand to. He must be on about his third or fourth career now, actually, thinking about it. It's an absolute pleasure to have him on the Curiosity Cast. Welcome, Alan Johnson. How are you?
Burnsy. I'm great, thanks.
It's great. It's
good to see you.
It's great to see you. Is it 3 or 4 careers? I'm thinking you started as a postman.
Well, the career I didn't have was as a rock star. I made a record when I was 16, but it never happened. But moving swiftly on, postman, and then union leader, and then MP, then government minister, and now author.
Yes, and a success at all of them. Apart from maybe the music, and we'll come to the music, I promise, because I know it's a big thing in your life. So we'll start with one from Katie in HU14, which is in the West Hull Villages. Is there anything you miss about being a politician?
Well, I miss you. You used to be grilling me every so often.
You need to get out more.
Not really, because I did it for 20 years and I still live in the area. So I still get my dose of, what's going on. But once you've done it for 20 years and once you've occupied 5 cabinet positions, you've got no regrets about it. And you've got a lot to be pleased that you've done it. And went on your own terms at your own time. Some of my colleagues, the electorate decide to dispense with their services. That must be pretty galling to stand there and know you've lost the seat you used to represent. So that didn't happen to me. I decided to step down, and I can invent a few regrets, but they would be inventing them. I've never woken up in the morning thinking, I wish I was back in politics.
Right, okay. Well, which is sort of negates Charles's question. Do you have any regrets about your time in government? Let me change that slightly. Is there anything you think I should have done that differently and there would have been a better outcome?
Yes, there are, and there's inevitably going to be that. I did 5 cabinet positions, but the longest I spent in one department was at health for 2 years. I was at work and pensions for 7 months, and that's where I'd have liked to have had a bit longer, because work and pensions was the biggest budget I ever had, much bigger than health. And there were issues there about eradicating poverty that I believe the only reason the Labour Party exists is for greater equality and the eradication of poverty. Uh-huh. And we were moving to the eradication of child poverty. We set a goal that it would be eradicated by 2020. By 2010, when we lost the election, Tories didn't win it, but it was a hung parliament, but we certainly lost it. We were halfway there. We could have done it. And it's actually gone backwards since then. And a lot of that was about what we do at work and pensions. And I think if we'd have moved a bit quicker, it couldn't have been reversed perhaps so easily.
Child poverty was an important thing, presumably because of your background.
Yeah.
Reading your memoirs.
Yeah, we're all creatures of our childhood, I guess. And once like many of your listeners, once you've experienced poverty, you never want to go back to it. Fortunately, it was my mother that had a hard life rather than me, and died young and all that. I experienced that poverty, me and my sister, when I was a child. I've never experienced it since, thank goodness.
Steph, in HU13, and this has affected people locally in the city, how was the Horizon scandal allowed to get so bad?
A combination of it. There's a great journalist called Nick Wallace who's been following this. And in a sense, it only took off with the public After that, Mr. Bates versus the Post Office. It shows you the power of drama, yeah. And because that was shown in a kind of in the new year when there wasn't much else to watch, it had a huge figures. When people were looking to watch the telly, huge viewing figures. And I think there's a lot of people like Nick Wallace thinking, well, if only the public had woken up to it, or if only the issue had been realised earlier, it could have prevented a lot of this.
Why didn't the politicians waken up to it? Were you aware of it at any stage? I'm not pointing a finger at you here, Alan.
No. Well, my background was in the post office. I was a union leader in the post office. And I was a junior minister when Horizon was introduced. And everyone wanted Horizon, all the sub-postmasters. The sub-post offices, you used to have to, you remember this, Dave, pensioners could only get their pension by queuing up at the post office on a Thursday morning. In the 80s, that changed. You could have it paid into your bank account. And loads of them obviously did. Why would you queue up in the cold when you can have it paid into your bank account? And overnight, the raison d'etre of this vast network of 25,000 post offices when I joined, it shrunk to about 16,000 by the time I was in government. How do we get new work? And it was still a pen and paper linking all this vast network. We need to computerize it. That's the kind of things that computerization is for. And then you can attract new banking work and all of that. So everyone wanted it. When it started to go wrong, and in answer to the very pertinent question there, the problem was that each sub-postmaster who was having their collar felt, turns out quite wrongly, were being told they were the only ones having trouble with this new computerized system. None of them were told, oh, actually, loads of people are having problems with this. In a sense, I blame, they did have a union, not my union. Communication workers represented those in Crown offices, but they didn't represent the sub-postmasters. That was an organisation called the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters. And why they never blew the whistle. There's an inquiry, so it'll all come out. Why then they never blew the whistle earlier to say, why are so many people having the same trouble with this equipment? I don't know. The inquiry might tell us.
This is producer Dave.
Because Private Eye, although you say it was the ITV drama that brought you up, Private Eye have been on it for years.
For ages,
Many. And then I think a couple of other journalists.
And Nick Wallace has been on it for years.
Is this a naive question? Is it kind of an inevitable consequence of privatisation? Is it the inevitable consequence of giving it to people who want to make a profit from it? Because the same thing's happening really with the rivers and water at the minute to an extent.
Yeah, the answer to that is no, because Post Office Network was never privatised. So what they did in 2010 was to break up the coalition government, they actually got round to doing it in 2012, was to break up this great organisation that I joined when I was 18 called the Post Office, the General Post Office it was called then, leave the Post Office counters network in the public sector because it could never wash its face. No one's interested in buying it. Never going to make a profit, and privatise Royal Mail. But the problems with the Horizon system started way before that anyway, and that part of the post office wasn't privatised. So the answer to that is no. But certainly there's something in there. I've got my own theories that I'm not going to talk about because let's wait for the inquiry. But somewhere in there, I think, is an organisation called the Post Office Investigation, POID Department, who are kind of ex-coppers, who the Post Office had their own police force. The Post Office could prosecute. In most other cases, it's down to the Director of Public Prosecutions. Mm-hmm. The Post Office had their own right to prosecute, their own police service. That's a bit unhealthy. And when it all came together with a bit of faulty equipment that everyone was enthusiastic about and wanted it to work, I think that's the kind of components to a disaster.
Indeed, a disaster, national scandal, and you will not even, because it will not get into the contaminated blood scandal and things like that. The sad fact about these is they're allowed to go on too long by successive governments, aren't they? They're not dealt with fairly in the end.
Well, there were some MPs there, James Arbuthnot, the Conservative MP, who took it up on behalf of a constituent. I never had any constituents come to me about it, but I did. I remember I told the inquiry, actually, that in 2004, 2005, a load of sub-postmasters from Doncaster came to my surgery here in the library where we are now to talk to me about this. But, you know, you are not allowed to represent people from another constituency. You can only represent people who you're accountable to. So I said to them, well, you need to go and go and speak to your own MP. But I did alert the General Secretary of the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters, because the expectation was, well, the perfect people to deal with this are the ones they're paying their subs to represent them. And that was the NFSP.
We shall move on. Tony via Twitter gets in touch with the Curiosity Cast. Do you think the current politicians are the worst ever? Have they always been bad? Says Tony.
No, if I can use my own experience. Listen, I stepped down in 2017. Still live in the area. When I go into Sainsbury's in Hessel, I'm still waiting for the first person to come to me and say, "Oh, Alan, we really miss you." They don't say that. They say to me, "Oh, hello, Alan. Emma's doing a great job." And I'm really pleased about that. I'm pleased that the constituency has passed over to someone like Emma Hardy, who is absolutely brilliant. And so, no, I don't. If you look at, Diana as well, what she's done on contaminated blood, and now a minister, quite rightly. No, I don't hold with this.
But it feels a different country. I mean, I'm not taking political sides here, but the country's in a bit of a mess and has been in a bit of a mess. And
that's 14 years of, I'm bound to say this, 14 years of cut back, squeeze and freeze. When I left the Home Office in 2010, and it's not just me, it was after our government, crime was at its lowest level ever. It halved. People's confidence in the police was at its highest level. You had neighbourhood policing all round here. When I'd left the Department of Health the previous year, satisfaction with the NHS was its highest ever. Waiting times have been brought down from 18 months. 18 months for 2 years for a simple cataract operation was down to a maximum of 18 weeks and an average of 9 weeks. So, there's no secret. Look at the difference between 2010 and 2024. And whilst I don't want to, I'm not a tribal politician, you can't ignore what happened. Austerity, that awful referendum, whatever side of the argument you were on, it didn't do the country any good, and it didn't do people's families any good arguing between themselves about that issue. I don't think referendums are a way to run the country. And then you get into what happened through Boris Johnson's time and Liz Truss's budget, and all compounding one on the other to produce the terrible situation our roads, our waterways, our NHS, everything is in at the moment.
Will Sir Keir Starmer make it better? Because he's mired in sort of controversy already with the freebies and things like that.
No,
was he daft there?
It's been a poor start. You see, when you come in on the basis of, restoring public's trust in politicians, things like freebies I got offered. The Archbishop of Canterbury gets offered freebies. Anyone in a position of authority will be asked. I was invited to go to the proms. I'm an old political has-been this summer. So those things always occur. Taylor Swift concerts, there's people who'd be MPs would be invited to that. I'd be quite excited to get an invitation to that. But should have realised that actually, and totally with suits and glasses, if you're looking to cleanse the Augean stables and change, what was going on before, then you've got to take a more principled stance than that. Final point on that, of course, where it actually got ridiculous, you'll appreciate this, is the Arsenal season ticket. So Keir Starmer is an Arsenal season ticket holder, pays for his season ticket, has done every year for 40 years. Once he was Prime Minister, the security service, who I used to be responsible for, MI5, they're not going to allow him to sit in the same seat that everyone knows he sits in every other week at the Emirates. They're going to say, sorry, mate, we're responsible for keeping you safe. You are now a target. You're the Prime Minister. That was all right while you were leader of the opposition. You're going to sit somewhere more secure. He wouldn't have had a say in that. To use that against him as if it's some kind of big freebie thing, I think he'd have much preferred, as you and I would, to sit with your old mates as a season ticket holder, as part of the Saturday experience.
A couple of beers beforehand and after, and
I think
referee, what are you doing?
I think that's key to it. I think they have had a bad start. But so much of what's going on is confected. because we do have a predominantly right-wing media.
Yeah.
And they want to start giving Labour a kick in right from day one, which is what they're doing.
There's no proportionality to it. You're absolutely right. And what's being missed is, the biggest deportation of failed asylum seekers ever, 300, went back just 3 weeks ago. And that was a big issue for many people. The introduction of the bill to nationalise the railways again and bring them back into public ownership, the Great British Energy Initiative, to clean up our waters. That's going to be Emma Hardy who's going to be taking that bill through Parliament. All of that is happening, but it hasn't really got any traction, no.
Can I just add, sorry, Dave?
Go on, certainly.
You mentioned Brexit, and I'm sorry to go off sheet and everything, but how long? I think even people who voted Brexit can now see that it isn't working, it hasn't worked, and it's done a lot of damage. How long before we can legitimately open the debate again and start saying, what do we do? Because this entire thing has been a disaster. When can we look at going back into Europe?
I don't know if that, I would say a guess about 30 years before looking to rejoin. That doesn't mean you can't go back into the single market.
No.
Norway are not in the European Union, but part of the single market, or go back into those things that were the Erasmus scheme, which educated our kids across Europe. Previous government, anything that had an E in it for Europe, they didn't want to go anywhere near, including the European arrest warrant that keeps us safe. That's not to say, Dave, that we can't go back into those things. Yeah. I just cannot see us going back into Europe, not least of all because you'd need another referendum. And I think we've had enough of referendums for a while.
I've just crossed myself.
But even the ECHR, which is obviously a great thing, they want to, because it's got the word.
But that's nothing to do with the European Union. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And I just think, so 30 years, so it's a generational mistake.
I would think so, yeah. I would think so. And my Harold Wilson book, of course, talks about the referendum in 75 when we voted overwhelmingly to stay in the European Union.
We will come to that. Our guest on the CuriosityCast is former local MP, former government minister, now author, and still musician. We'll ask him about guitars in a bit in what remains of the CuriosityCast. Where shall we go? Nigel's got one via Twitter for you, Alan. What powers would you give councils so they could operate better? Or would you just give them more money?
Well, they certainly need more money. Nobody's been affected by austerity more than local authorities. And at first it was stuff that people didn't notice, but it was penny packet grants that kept lots of charities running that the council had out. Then as austerity really took hold, it was affecting children's services and it was affecting Meals on Wheels and things that people really depend on in the charitable sector. And because adult social care is a local authority responsibility, we've seen the mess that's come there. What powers would I give them? I'd change that question around a bit. We talk about devolution to these things that are going to have a mayor and all that, big shiny and all the rest, shiny new things. Well, devolution to local authorities, proper devolution, the old municipal pride that people had in this city. Look at the Guildhall. Look at what a wonderful building it was, built on the prosperity of the fishing industry, mainly. And people took pride in it. And they took pride in it because councils mattered and council elections mattered. And I think we need to restore councils to their proper place in our democracy. And that's not about what powers to give them. It's about what respect to give them. We talk about Parliament and we talk about mayors. Well, okay, if you have a mayor and it works, great. But it's the local authority that does the hard work.
So you're not a fan of the new devolution deal for Hull and the East Riding?
Well, I always say it's the second worst option. The worst option being just being left out while everybody else. You go to Tyneside, you go to Teesside, you go to Merseyside, they've got 7 or 8 councils all working together across their estuary. We couldn't manage that, mainly because North Lincolnshire and North East Lincolnshire went off. And so the Humber, huge economic driver of this area, hasn't got what the Tees has got and what the Tyne has got and what the Mersey has got. And I hope that one day that will change. In the meantime, this is a step towards it. At least Hull and East Riding working together. who should have been working together. You know about the tight boundaries around the city. No other city, not Leeds, Sheffield, whatever, all their suburbs are part of the city. In Hull, the suburbs are part of a different local authority altogether. So those two authorities working together is a step in the right direction, but second worst option, because the worst option would have been nothing at all.
We'll see how it works out. We might do a podcast on it, a CuriosityCast in the future, and get a perspective on it. Alan Johnson is our guest. Louise asked a question about, had you become Prime Minister, what single piece of legislation would you have made your personal mission? I suspect from your earlier answer, it might have been to do with child poverty.
What about poverty? But it would have been early years. It would have been, we had Sure Start, and Sure Start's now virtually disappeared. It was probably the most important thing that we were doing. And I would want to recreate that, and I think the government are going to do that. Bridget Phillipson, who's the Education Secretary, give them time on all of this stuff. But you can't call it Sure Start. It's got to be a different thing now. But I'm a firm believer, the earlier you don't have to bring the school starting age back. In Finland, they don't start school till 7. They're speaking 4 languages by the time they're 11. Speak their own language, speak Swedish, speak English, 3. The odd one speaks 4 as well. By the time they're 11, what's the reason for that? Because they have this huge preschool network, which is actually joined up. It's not just taking someone along to look after the kids. They're getting an education when it's all soaking in. Mm-hmm. Languages should be taught to a kid as young as possible, not wait until they're in secondary schools. So I'd have really made a lot on that, because I think it does attack poverty, but it does also ensure that people get a reasonable start, irrespective of their background.
Let us move on and away from the politics, because Sharon in HU3, which is in the city centre, because we'll get onto the second or third part of your career, or fourth part of your career in a bit. But what did it feel like when you got your stolen guitar back? For those that don't know, explain the story.
So I was in 2 bands in the 60s, The Area, who I made the record with when I was 16, and then a much better band called The In-Betweens, who had come and sort of headhunted me, which was great. It was a multiracial band, very unusual, girl singer, very unusual. We were due to back the Small Faces on a tour.
Wow.
All our gear got nicked. When I was with The Area, all our gear got nicked, but I'd taken my guitar, my precious Hofner Very Thin, cherry red, mother of pearl inlay, beautiful Bigsby tremolo for any guitar freaks there. I'd taken it home that night. So I had it with me and plugged it in, because the In-Betweens had their own equipment and they had their own management. Plugged it in. This time, when the In-Between stuff got nicked from Islington, over the Pied Horse pub in Islington, they took my guitar as well. I was 18. I thought, what am I going to do? I was about to get married in a few months' time, and the bass guitarist was a postman. I said, why don't you join the post office? So that was the end of my music career, although I thought I'd always go back to it. Anyway, I relayed this story about my Hofner Very Thin being nicked on the radio. And this guy, I was still in Parliament at the time, sent me an email from Scotland saying, I've got a Hofner Very Thin. They stopped making them in 1963. Mine was bought second-hand from a guitar shop in Wardle Street in 66. He said, I've got one, and it's cherry red, mother of pearl inlay. It's got a Bigsby tremolo. I'll come down to Hull, and I'm willing to sell it to you. So he brought it. Cost me 35 quid, by the way, in 66.
Right, okay.
He came down. I met him in the Holiday Inn on the Marina. He had the case. He opened the case, and I just knew that was my guitar. You get little cigarette burns on a guitar. There was a quirky thing with the paint on the back of it, and I thought, now I couldn't accuse this guy of stealing it. He had the reasonable alibi that he hadn't been born at the time. But it was my guitar. It cost me 700 quid. But I tell you what, I'd have paid a bit more than that to get I'm absolutely convinced I've got my Hofner Very Thin guitar back. What was it like? It was absolutely wonderful. It's like being reunited with a child.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Did it stay in, because I saw, did it stay in tune? I saw a video of the Paul
Well, he kept it in tune.
Well, he said the Bixby used to send them out of tune fairly easy.
Yeah, well, it did.
So if you used it too much, you'd have to
You're constantly retuning it. But I used to play an Echo 12 string as well, acoustic, and tuning a 12 string up is, it's quite easy to do a 6, particularly with the gear you got now. I didn't have it in my day. Stick them on the end and you put it in, you tune.
I'm going to have to bring order here. It's when musicians get talking, it does get a bit anarchy. So your creative juices may be thwarted in the musical sphere, but you have become a multi-award-winning author. I've just read recently your one of our ministers is missing, which I really enjoyed. So congratulations on that. You are writing all sorts of books. I'm going to get this question in from Ben in HU4. With all your books being named after Beatles songs, how many will you have to write before you call one "I Am the Walrus"?
Very well. Looking around at you two with your beards.
Yes, true.
I feel less walrusy in this studio. What's the name of the person who asked the question?
Ben in Westhall.
Ben, I'm now entitled to call my next one paperback writer.
Oh, very good. These are the memoirs. So is there another memoir coming?
No. There's the biography and there's another novel next year.
Right, okay. You've written one, and I'm assuming this will be the first of a series because it's called the Prime Minister series, and it's Harold Wilson. What drew you to Harold Wilson?
Well, it's a series of other writers doing a biography of a great Prime Minister.
Ah, right, okay.
And this is
so
a
it's
publisher.
Not you doing the whole series.
It's not me doing the whole lot,
right,
although,
okay.
I'm willing if I'm approached. So I was commissioned to do this. And it's a great idea, by the way. I think a really important idea by a publisher called Swift Press. Why Wilson? I think his reputation is worthy of being restored. I think he's one of the greatest prime ministers this country has ever had. Mm-hmm. If you think about his effect on ordinary people's happiness, and he's changed the divorce laws for a start that said you can be divorced on the basis of irretrievable breakdown. My mother couldn't divorce my father, even though he'd done a moonlight flit when I was 8. It was very much against women, the divorce laws. Decriminalised homosexuality. He made abortion legal, gave women control over their own fertility. He introduced the Health and Safety Act that stopped the carnage on factory floors. Millions of working days lost because of accidents. He built, talking about housing, 400,000 houses in a year. No one's done as much as that either before or since. So he had a huge impact on people's lives, won 4 general elections, only equalled by Gladstone in the 19th century, won a European referendum, which is one more than David Cameron, and yet is thought of as some kind of slippery, dishonest character, which is absolute rubbish. He was a master of the political arts, and to get stuff through Parliament and to make headway in a democracy, you need to be a master of the political arts, and he was. And, I hope his reputation, this helps to restore his reputation.
And it's out now.
It's out now at all good bookshops.
Okay. Ideal Christmas present for
Ideal
those?
Christmas present, I would say, because it's slim and you can stick it in a stocking as well.
You're not moving into tax exile or anything. You're still very much local, aren't you?
No, but my first thriller, The Late Train Gypsy Hill, is being filmed by BBC Studios. So
is it?
Yeah, it could be a film or a television series. BBC Studios, of course, can sell to anyone. So it could be Netflix, it could be whatever.
So how many? Is it 3 thriller novels now?
There's the Mangan trilogy, yes.
Yes.
This is Louise Mangan is my detective. And they're making the first. They've got an option on the other 2.
Nice.
Yeah, great stuff.
Will you be a consultant then? Are you as part of the deal?
Like that. My agent told me, look, it's a different skill. There's a script writer on this. Don't get precious about it. The fact is, it's going to have from the book by Alan Johnson. That's the main thing for you. But if they invite me on the set, I'll go.
I'm sure they'll invite you. It's been absolutely fascinating. I think we could have talked much longer, and it's really nice to see you.
Yeah,
it's fantastic to see you. I think he probably wanted to be a Beatle, really, but he's done all right. So, Alan Johnson, thank you very much for your time on the CuriosityCast. And remember, you can ask questions, seek answers, and maybe give us some suggestions for guests on the Curiosity website, www.curiosityhull.co.uk, or follow and friend us on all the socials where we're Curiosity Hull and all the main feeds. We'll be back very soon with more quality answers to whatever questions you'd like to ask.